Welcome back. This is my fourth response to Braxton Hunter, covering his 10 questions for atheists. The previous 3 videos, we've already done numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Here, we're going to do 6 through 9. The last video in this series, the next one coming up, we'll cover the last question, question number 10. That one takes a bit too. Anyways, we've had enough introductions to this. Let's just get into it, yeah? Yeah, here's the tunes.
Of the arguments for God's existence, is there one that to you seems more interesting than the rest? Is there one that for you actually does weigh in favor of theism? Which one?
Yeah, no. Sorry, Braxton, but no, I don't find any of them particularly interesting. And I can't think of one that's ever reached the conclusion of God exists from valid premises and sound logic. I'm sorry, I understand philosophical argumentation is a favorite pastime of many fans of theology, but let me tell you a little secret here. That type of thing, it really doesn't land with me. Because all it can do is find a coherent model. And there's nothing saying the philosophical model, even if coherent, and let's face it, most of them ain't, is actually real. This is where the problem of supernature acts as a barrier between the fictitious and reality. I mean, that, even more than the God proposition, is what you guys need to start to overcome. Creating coherent models, those that stay true to themselves, even if they're not connected to reality. This is what fiction writers do all the time in worlds that we create. We'll map out things that aren't real. Magic, time travel, phaser weapons. We'll figure out how these things work and keep a consistent model of them. So this way, when we present them to the reader, we can keep them suspending their disbelief. Otherwise, if you screw that up, you kick them out of the story. I've been doing this since I was 7. Banging out old stories on my old manual Smith Corona typewriter. So trust me, throwing up some silliness like the Kalam or whatever have you, that isn't ever going to get me to blink. You won't impress me none until you demonstrate that your model, that you arrived at by logical deduction, is actually existent. Until then, it's just an idea. A hypothetic. The idea ain't ever going to get you there. Ever. As existent supernature seems to be the baseline assumption of the Apologist, a priori, for you types that get off on philosophical terms. Justification for this is often difficult or impossible for them to give me in any meaningful way that distinguishes it from the mystery or the unknown, the non-existent or the fictitious. And so they dismiss this criterion, if they even thought about it in the first place. Because I think most of them, they kind of assume that everybody holds their position on, the validity of supernature, or for reasons that I can't comprehend, believe themselves qualified to speak on it. So they adjust their tie and they take the podium and they wheeze out for the 1000th time with this slightly Baptist twang, all things that begin to exist, as they stare off into the middle distance. To me, that's about where I hear Chuck D in my head.
Here we go again.
Playing word games with apologists can be a fun little exercise, if a skosh frustrating. But none of your proofs, and yeah, the air quotes, those are required, of your God are worth considering more than I might the question of whether decaf coffee should ever enter my home. Or whether I should get pepperoni and sausage on my pizza, or pineapple, zucchini, and 3 emptied ashtrays. Just spare me the word games and go discover a God already, will you?
Most atheists I've met humbly admit that they don't think they can have absolute certainty about much of anything. But what they want from the Christian is a demonstration that God exists, or that Christianity is true. Well, when we offer the reasons to believe that we do have, those are typically deemed not good enough.
Right.
So what sort of evidence, if any, would be enough to convince you? Do you know? And since it's often a conversation stopper, let's take experimental reproducibility off the table, since that's not even always necessary for science.
Yeah, let's not. For me to consider divinity existent, you first need to overcome the problem of supernature. You need to find a way to differentiate between the unknown, the mysterious, the non-existent, and the fictitious. After that, you can sally forth and start collecting the data that'll lead everyone to the conclusion of existent divinity. What kind of data would I need to reach that conclusion with you? I suppose that's a fair question. Consider the evidence offered to describe a new species of life, right? And if that doesn't suit, if the whole biological thing doesn't suit you, then, maybe, the type of evidence that you would use to inform people of a newly discovered phenomenon. Something like the gravity waves, the Higgs boson, a new exoplanet. What I would need to consider the divine as existent would be on par with those kind of things. Now, I understand this may not jive well with your whole request of experimental reproducibility being taken off the table, but I'm sorry, Braxton, but your request is denied. All right? You asked me what standard I have, and then asked me if I even know if I have a standard, and then in the very next sentence, you asked me to violate that standard in order to accommodate you. Are you kidding me? The standard is what the standard is. Here's an example of the standard, okay? So if a guy's birthday, all right, his 21st birthday is March 9th, all right? And he walks into the liquor store and tries to buy a bottle of 151 on March 2nd, they ain't gonna sell it to him. They'd be like, nah, kid, come back in a week. I can't sell this to you. They won't lower the standard. I am not gonna lower my standard either. I can't, ethically, and it's kind of unethical for you to even ask that a lower standard be granted you with your proposition when it's not offered to anybody else. This isn't persecution or maligning against Christianity or nothing like that. That is consistent across the board. This is the criteria that every apologist from every religion faces. But as far as Christianity, like in specifics, you guys ain't even as close as that 20-year-old trying to kick off the party a week early. You're trying to buy a bottle of 151 when you're 11 3/4. You're using a 46-year-old's expired driver's license, and you really don't look much like a Stephanie either. I'd honestly feel a little bad for you if the problem of supernature could be overcome and a God could be discovered as I've described. Because it'd be heartbreaking for you, I am sure, to see discovered divinity not aligning with the Christian claims of what divinity is and should be. I really would. I feel bad for you guys. A little bit. But if you ever can, or if you ever do discover the divine, I will absolutely celebrate your discovery. I will sing your praises for such an accomplishment. I absolutely would. I'm telling you right now, I would stand on the rooftop of the firehouse and belt out, Braxton Hunter, he has discovered a God! I would. Absolutely. You know how amazing that would be? You'd change the freaking world, man. Of course I would. I'm telling you, I would get Brax Hunter #1 as a personalized license plate on my car and drive all around with that. No freaking problem, right? The Miskatonic University license plate frame, though, that stays. But even more than that, what I think would be really interesting is if a God could be discovered, what theological position you'd hold. That, I think, would be pretty freaking neat.
To what extent did social and moral issues start you down the path toward your atheism? That is to say, the typical Christian or religious views on sexuality, gender, rights, and acts and commands of God in the Old Testament. It seems that many deconversion stories online begin with, or at least include, LGBT issues, purity culture, or hell as instrumental in the deconversion process. It strikes me that what should matter most is the truth and not what we might prefer that the truth were. I honestly wonder how much those issues and ones like them motivate the deconversion rather than all this talk about evidence.
Awfully bold of you, Braxton, to assume I had such an experience. I didn't. You need to speak with someone who has deconverted in the classic sense to get their answers to that. Might I suggest Pine Creek, Apologia, Telltale. Such was not my experience. My path to atheism, such as it were, had nothing to do with any of that. It was more a case of attempted indoctrination failing, because I already knew how to read. See, by the time my great-grandparents made my mother take my brother and I to church, I'd already read tales of gods and heroes from other cultures, and yes, some fictional accounts as well. See, let me back up. I was real sick as a kid, and I spent an enormous amount of time in the hospital and physical rehab centers and things like that. All right, so books, reading, that was my jam. All those weeks and months that I spent in the hospital, I scarfed down damn near everything that I found mildly interesting. In tales of gods and heroes and things like that, that was pretty interesting. So the Jewish and early Christian culture myths that are documented in the Bible, I knew that these are only but two amongst many different culture myths already in existence. And the exclusionary claims that Christianity wants to make for itself in its theology, they're contradicted by its very own text. I told you in the first video, that anthology really needs an editor. See, if someone was aware that there was people out there who believed in other gods and viewed them to be as real as the Christians thought that their gods were, it kind of smells like bullshit to say that there's one true religion and one true God, and lucky us, we just happen to be right. We know we're right because the Jews can't be right because they don't worship Jesus. It can't be the Catholics, they pray to saints. And that other church down the street, those guys, they use the NIV, like on purpose. We know they're wrong. Everybody knows that King James is the real deal, y'all. It was because of things like that that I could not, in good conscience, affirm enough of the Apostles' Creed to qualify as a Christian. So, I'm not.
Can you name the last 3 academic books you read by theists on the subject? How long ago did you read them? Or is most of your understanding of apologetics and atheism from non-scholarly internet sources, pop-level books, and, let's face it, YouTube videos? And be honest with yourself about this. Anyone can Google up a list of books and paste them in the comments section. But I want to know, are you getting the best from the other side?
Last 3 books by theist authors. All right. Well, I've recently read parts of Marcus Borg's Evolution of the Word, as well as some of Ignatius's letters to the Ephesians and some of the other early church fathers. In addition to this, I've been rereading some of the anonymous authors of the New Testament and that Paul fella. Now, I will grant that not all of these were academic books on the subject as you requested, but I would think that the Borg probably counts, yep. I will also allow that some of the books of the New Testament were not written by what we would call Christians, but more Jewish heretics, though they are theists. The time frame of these would be considered recent by any meaningful standard. The time of recording this video, it's been maybe 3 or 4 days since I looked at any of them. I've had things to do, man. I've worked a couple of nights in there. We've got COVID stuff going on. I got the critters to take care of, work things, house things. I've had to do laundry. The dishes were piling up a little bit. Come on, you know how life goes, yeah? I did, however, get to see a Bible quote by some guy on Twitter, thinking it was a meaningful contribution to the conversation at hand. I quoted some of my favorite supernatural literature back at him. He seemed rather miffed. I'll be honest, Braxton, I'm a little disappointed in you for this question. I'll explain here, okay? But this kind of question, this really reeks of an attempt at academic intimidation, right? It's part of the problem I have with you apologists in the first place. I expect this kind of thing from Muslims who always go to the, you need to study this and 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 this to even think about criticizing the Quran or their religion. Now I know that isn't exactly what you were saying, but it's in the same vein, and you know it is. Tell me, Braxton, would one be justified in calling themselves Christian if all they read was the hymnal in church on Sundays and the passages from the Bible the pastor directed them to throughout the course of his sermon? I think that you'd probably count those among those that you'd refer to as Christian and say they were justified in calling themselves such, would you not? So if belief and passing familiarity are good enough to be considered Christian with justification, then non-belief and passing familiarity ought to be good enough to be considered atheist with justification, if one wishes to be consistent. You do wish to be consistent, right? Or is it that Christianity suddenly requires parishioners to read academic books on the subject of atheism for a pop quiz at any time? I know the church my parents brought me to certainly didn't have such a policy, and my hyper-religious great-grandparents had nothing by Thomas Paine or Bertrand Russell in their home when they died. I went through their bookshelves. Books, kind of my jam. I recall great-grandma's shelves. She had a lot of books on sewing and quilting, a number on her prize singer 66. It was the treadle bit. She taught me how to do that with the feet to get the thing going. My seams were all over the place, but I could get the thing going. And in the cookbooks, she'd tip in her own takes, her own improvements on the recipes that was already therein. And she'd write them out in her perfect thin little script on this yellowed paper, throw it in there. Now, I could tell you great-grandma's writing from across the frickin' room to this very day. Absolutely. I could look at a piece of paper, like an old piece of paper, and be like, yep, that's great-grandma's writing. Great-grandpa's shelves? Yeah, he had a bunch of Chiltons for the farm equipment, some reloading manuals, and there he had little notes sticked in at 243 and 270 and 30-06. I mean, the calibers he always used, right? And he had a number of books on World War I and World War II aircraft, as well as some books on the Great War that also had papers tucked into them, highlighting the battles that he had fought in or, people that he served with. But he had nothing like academia from the atheist perspective. Nothing like it. But you know what they had? Aside from that, there was no alcohol in the house. Not even a deck of cards. So, tell me, Braxton, were my great-grandparents bad Christians? Now, as far as getting the very best from the other side, I'm pretty extra special sure that I am. Unless you are about to cite a book more authoritative on the subject than the book that you refer to as Scripture. Is that what you're going to do, Braxton? You got a better book on the subject than the Word of God? Yeah, didn't think so. By reasonably dismissing the apologist for failing to overcome the problem of supernature and going to the source material, one removes the biased influence of someone who has their honor bound to a statement of faith, and can thereby avoid their annoying apologetic word games and see what the text that they refer to as Scripture says and what it doesn't, if one happens to be interested in reading it in the first place. Personally, I could not recommend. 0 out of 5 stars. Really crappy writing, poor character development, and the dialogue makes H.P. Lovecraft's look like Elmore Leonard's by comparison. The whole anthology desperately needs an editor. But I'm here. I can help you out with that. I'm available. Reasonable rates. I'll work with you. Have your people call my people. we'll discuss terms of contract.